this ruined cottage is where a young lad called Alexander was born in 1775. His father was a poor crofter and shepherd, and he had a couple of other sons. He farmed a little bit of land just outside the cottage. He pastured sheep on the hills around. And when Alexander was about 5, it was time for him to start earning his keep in the family. And so his father sent him out with the sheep to watch over them while the father and the other brothers did other work around the house and the farm. And it was then that the family discovered something which perhaps they had suspected, but they hadn't realized. You see, the fields round about are full of large grey stones, about the same size and colour as a sheep. And Alexander Murray, with his little piece, his food, took the sheep out into the fields and sat down under a convenient tree to watch over them. But Alexander Murray had terribly short sight. And looking around, he couldn't see the difference between the sheep and the stones, and he was charmed at just how docile the sheep were. Whereas in reality, the sheep were wandering far up along the hills, and Alexander was watching the stones. And when the evening came and he tried to round the stones up and drive them home, they didn't want to go. And poor little Alexander, crestfallen, had to go home and tell his father that the sheep were lost. Of course, his father wasn't pleased. He and his other sons had to spend the next couple of hours in the evening, when they should have been resting, wandering over the hills trying to find the sheep and bring them back again. And when this happened not once, not twice, but 3 times, his father said to him, "Ach, lad, you're nae good to me. I want to help your mother in the kitchen." And so poor little Alexander had to go out into the kitchen to help his mother doing women's work. He was a good lad. He did his best. But when his mother gave him a tray of cream to carry out into the dairy, and he carried it, but failed to see the family dog lying on the floor at his feet, and over he went, and the cream went everywhere. And when disasters like this happened, not once, not twice, but 3 times, his mother said to him, "Ach, lad, you're nae good to me either. Go on to the other room and keep yourself quiet." You ever tried telling a little 5-year-old boy to sit still and keep quiet? But fortunately, Alexander and his family belonged to the Reformed Church. And that meant that they were able to read. They didn't read much. In fact, the only book in the house was the great big family Bible. But Alexander's father, with a bit of stone, and taught him his letters in the evenings after work. And before long, Alexander was able to read the Bible. It was painfully slow as he held it up to his face and read a word at a time, or possibly even a letter at a time. But he read the Bible through from beginning to end, once, twice, 3 times. And then one Sunday at the church, at the kirk, he had a question. And he asked the dominie. I don't know what the question was, but the dominie took time to chat to this little boy, who I suppose was about 8 by now, and discovered that he had such a profound knowledge of the Bible that he was impressed and arranged for him to go to school. And so Alexander, the only one of his family, went to school. So every day, Alexander set off up the long, weary road, carrying his satchel and his food, and went to school. And after 4 years, he had completed his education. The school could take him no further. And he had done so well that the schoolmaster put him up for a scholarship at Edinburgh University. And Alexander got the scholarship and went off to university, where he devoured books and learning. And his ambition in life was to become a dominie, a minister, like the man who had been so kind to him and set him on the path of learning. Alexander graduated from his course at Edinburgh University, and he became the dominie at Ur, U-R-R. But unfortunately, perhaps it was to do with his sight as well, I don't know, but he suffered from poor health Or maybe it was his upbringing here in a poverty-stricken croft. And before very long, he found the work of being a minister, the constant visiting, the preaching, the being out and about at all hours and times and weathers. It was too much for him. And he had to give it up. And then he was invited back to Edinburgh University to become the professor of Oriental languages. He had a genius for languages. And he became the professor there at Edinburgh University, teaching Hebrew and Aramaic. And I don't know whether there were any other languages, but they were the main ones that he taught. Unfortunately, he died young. He was only about 37. And when he died, so great was the outpouring of grief over the loss of this rising star that his birthplace almost became a shrine. And today there is an obelisk on the hill overlooking his birthplace. And here outside the door, where once he guarded the sheep, there is this stone, a memorial to Alexander Murray, the lad who became a professor, even though he was born as a crofter and a shepherd. In the Bible, which Alexander Murray loved so well, there's a verse, it's Romans 8:28, which says that all things work together for good to them that love God. Those who love God can be sure that whatever life throws at them, whatever accidents or incidents befall, God will bring good out of it. That is his promise. I imagine that Alexander's parents must have offered many fervent prayers to God, asking that their son's eyesight be cured. I imagine that Alexander himself, in his childish way, must often have prayed, "Dear Lord, please help me to see like my brothers." That prayer wasn't answered. To the end of his days, he had short sight. But just think, if Alexander had been able to see normally, he would have lived out his life as an unknown shepherd here in the hills above Newton Stewart, and no one would ever have heard of him. Truly, all things work together for good to them that love God.